Welcome to the AirCon Vault, recordings of the live streams from Airwiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Sound Cuts, Tsugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and Airwiggles, the online home for audio people.
Welcome to my talk, Start Making Music in Reaper, You Fools, the famous quote from the Lord of the Rings films that you probably misheard if you didn't hear him saying this. A little bit about me. I am Jon Kelliher. I am a Swedish-Irish chap from Spain living in Cardiff. That's my elevator pitch. And currently, I'm the principal audio designer at No Breaks Games, working on Human Fall Flat 2. I've worked on games like Warp Drive and Trailblazers as a sound designer, composer, programmer, and game designer, or basically working in small teams. I've had to wear many hats. I've also worked as a freelance composer, working, in different styles, whether it's orchestral stuff or, working on indie films, doing weird kind of electronic stuff as well. And prior to that, I also worked as a professional guitarist, and that's what I studied, and also a songwriter in many, many bands, making sort of symphonic death metal to singer-songwriter stuff to what I now would call my new pastime, which is like Wii era bops, and I'll share some stuff in the future. So when I first started conceptualizing this talk, I wanted to do a bit of research and kind of ask you guys, the community, or you folks rather, what the reasons were for not using Reaper as a music making tool. Obviously, there are a bunch of us sound designers here on Airwiggles, but I know for a fact that a lot of us don't use Reaper for reasons that we'll go to in a second. And I kind of wanted to just delve into why. And I think unanimously, there was one big reason that you're all probably able to guess is, as Heli so rightly puts it, MIDI is ass. Sorry for embarrassing you, Heli, but that is one of the biggest issues with why people don't use Reaper for making music. Heli wasn't the only person who shared this sentiment. Lewis put himself for an accumulative total of 6 points for why the MIDI sucks. But there are obviously other reasons as well. So those include Lewis's point of it doesn't have Space Designer, the convolution reverb plugin that is a Apple Logic Pro exclusive. And no, you're right, it does not have Space Designer, and that does really suck because it's very good. Some other reasons include from Dan saying, I've been using Cubase for 25 years and finally just learned what all the menu items do just this week. Why would I leave now? Also, Motaz says signal chain and routing is a hassle. While it is very doable, it's just not as visual as Ableton's audio effects rack and FL's patcher. Nathan Moody said, I work at a facility that's a Pro Tools shop, so our workflow is 100% contingent on being able to share Pro Tools sessions. And you know what? I can't argue with that. That's fair enough. And for just a devil's advocate, Duncan says, I love making music in Reaper. All the tools I use to manipulate audio on a day-to-day basis are right there for me to make music with. And I mean, those are all entirely valid reasons. But to give you a bit of context as to like why I am doing this talk is that I was a Mac user for years, and I cut my teeth like in Logic Pro. I think I started on version 8, and I had a Mac computer ever since then. And then my mum's iMac broke, and she didn't have the money to pay for a new one because, Macs are expensive. So I was like, all right, well, I've got a PC for work now, and I'll pass this over to my mum. But now I've lost all of my ability to make music in Logic, and now I have to find something else to make music in. So I evaluated FL Studio on the recommendation of a friend of mine who really swears by it. And I also checked out Ableton because I hear that is kind of something that people use for making music and stuff. And there are lots of really, really cool out of the box plugins and stuff. But honestly, they just felt really alien to me compared to Logic. I'd also heard that there was this whispers on the wind of people making music in Reaper. But the more I dug into it, the more I kind of found that there weren't that many people who let's say bigger artists who were really using it. The ones that I did find, however, were the electronic music artist Tycho, Also, Wilbert Roget, who famously did the soundtrack for the critically acclaimed game Helldivers 2, and a bunch of other really, really cool Star Wars games, and a whole other back catalog, which is really cool. And if you're there, Will, hello. And also Julie Buchanan, who also, if you're there, hello. Julie Buchanan did some music for Rocket League and a bunch of other really, really cool games. And she said that she also uses Reaper, which is really awesome. So hopefully I can grow this list over time, and we can sort of big up Reaper as like a cool tool. Oh, Gareth is apparently a Reaper guy too. Gareth Coco, rather, which that's really cool. I didn't know that, so I should have found it. Anyway, with regards to what I want to cover over this talk is I want to outline the issues with making music in Reaper, which we've kind of already done. I also want to highlight some like high level settings to get Reaper set up comfortably, kind of like if you're starting with Reaper out of the box, what are some of the things that we can do to improve that? Also want to address the issues that were raised here, so everything that I just raised, and offer solutions to them, and also suggest extra customizations and workflow improvements that I've found that I think that people would like really benefit from. And kind of an extra point is that I lost my my spark for making music a little while ago due to numerous reasons, but I think doing it professionally was one of them, and I lost the reason for doing it along the way. So hopefully in this talk, I can at least, hopefully spark a little bit of inspiration, passion for making music for anyone who's kind of felt that way in the past as well. And hopefully sort of like change your thinking about like what making music is, and offer some different perspectives. So let's talk a little bit about the concept of Reaper as a DAW. From the core, it enables and encourages constant iteration of tools and workflow. So anyone who's a Reaper user will know that like from week to week, they have to back up their configs because they've added some new shortcuts and some new, like scripts and stuff like that make their workflow better. The out-of-the-box tools are limited in number, but they are actually powerful despite being ugly as sin. There's an incredibly dedicated and supportive community that shares all of their findings and asks lots of questions and is really wholesome, and that's like great. And on top of that, Rescript, the scripting language within, or the scripting tool within Reaper, allows people to create new functionality where there isn't any before. And if you're like me, I have recently started learning to Rescript a little bit because either I haven't found exactly what I'm looking for on the forums, or I just want to do things like quicker or in a more custom way that suits my needs. And probably one of the biggest points is the fact that unlike FL Studio and Ableton, I found that Reaper sort of abides by this sort of like classic DAW layout. You've got a timeline, you've got tracks that are sort of like represented on a mixer. And and that's really cool and easy for me to get my head around, especially coming from something like Logic, where that's the layout. FL Studio has some weird avant-garde way of not having tracks on the timeline represent things in the mixer, and like instruments don't represent things on the timeline. It's weird and strange. So with regards to setting up the basic settings in Reaper, I could go into your like every little setup and every little option, but I've actually found that this already exists. There is a guide for doing this in a way that I couldn't do justice, and this is the Reaper Tips Guide, the perfect setup guide, which is completely free, and there's a link here, and I'll share these slides afterwards so that you can sort of like click through all of the links and stuff like that. So essentially what this is a guide to setting up Reaper for the first time, or potentially there are loads of tips and tricks, even if you have set up Reaper in your perfect way, that you can sort of like learn from all these things. They're all just like little options and stuff. So there are things like organizing your media items into the project subfolder, because by default, for some strange reason, all of the files are just like loosely placed into the project folder. So you can sort of like create a subfolder in there, and like all the media items go in the media subfolder. Same with project backups, organizing how things are backed up and when they're backed up and stuff. Better default scrolling and navigation options, better grid lines and snapping options, shortcut suggestions, change the metronome sound, blah, 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 blah. All of these things, they're really useful, but there's not really much point in me going into them because you could just read this guide. So yeah, oh, thanks, Lewis, for sharing that. That's really handy. But yeah, again, the slides will be available for people to check out. Similarly, I highly recommend, if you haven't already, and yeah, you install Repack. It's a directory manager and updater for a lot of useful Reaper scripts and tools. And same with SWS. They're sort of like the most valuable part of Reaper because they allow so much like customization and access to like the community's like custom tools and stuff. So yeah, highly recommend installing those if you haven't already. Right. So with regards to project templates, I kind of feel that this is something that's very important for composers, particularly on a bigger scale, because obviously you're going to want to create templates for, you know, maybe you've got like an orchestral template that you want to use, or there is a like a rock or a metal sort of template that you want to use. Whatever that sort of template is, that's great. But also you can set a default project template. So whenever you open up Reaper for like with a new project, you can open that up and it opens up with like the default, you know, like tracks that you've got. Or say, for example, you want like plugins on the master track. Like I have a limiter on there just so that I can catch rogue peaks and my computer doesn't blow up. Also setting default rendering settings. This is a massive thing for me because it's quite annoying if you have to go in and change, you know, from like really crap MP3s as the default, which I doubt it is, but you know, like actually setting up so you've got all your like sample rates and wave files and all that sort of stuff. Also, there's another really cool thing. You can create order color rules. There's a link here as well. And this is another thing I found on Reaper Tips, which means that you can do things like you can set up tracks to be colored red if there's the word guitar inside them, and you can use wildcards to sort of like predefine those rules that make your workflow a lot easier if you're, you know, if you're just doing the same thing over and over again, or turning your woodwinds purple or whatever. It's really handy. This is my project template. It has changed since I made this, so yeah, but I'll kind of run through it anyway. I've got like pretty minimal toolbars up here. I've also got this thing, MFX list, which is very handy. I've got 2 tracks here nested under each other and a spacer because I hate making spacers. So I just duplicate them from here. I've also got my master track on the arrange window because it basically means that I actually very seldom open up the mixer window. And it just means that I sort of do all my mixing here for the most part. This is also the Reaper Tips theme. There is also another little thing here, which I haven't mentioned in the talk, but it's worth mentioning that this is like an adaptive grid size tool. So you could set the like grid distance between each line to be like bigger, wider, or smaller, and it changes based on the like how zoomed in you are. So that's really cool. I'll see if I can find that and sort of like retrospectively put it in or whatever. So yeah, so this is my theme. It's quite minimal, but it's really cool. And then with regards to render settings, this is, you know, there's a lot here and it can look quite daunting if you're not used to this, but it's incredibly powerful. One of the highlights is the fact that this directory here by default usually puts like, it predefines like a directory on your hard drive. And that is quite annoying. But if you delete all of that and you just leave it blank, it will just put your rendered files into the project folder. But also you can just put a path here with no hard drive like reference to it, and it will render to a subdirectory under the project folder basically. So I've put renders here, and that will go like the project folder, then it will be a folder within that called renders, and then my rendered file will be placed in there. You can also put wildcards in there as well, same as the file name. So you can use the wildcards to render out like the track name or the selected item or stuff like that, which is fantastic for stems. So if you're rendering out multiple stems, that's really handy for naming it like the track name and stuff like that. So that's really cool. You can also set obviously the file type and sample rate and the bit depth. Those are there and there. And then also similarly for music, metadata is really important. And you can add metadata here and you can also use wildcards for that. But, you know, if you're uploading your stuff to Apple Music, or you're uploading stuff to, I don't know, whatever, Spotify, all that sort of stuff, it's really handy for you to have metadata there with your artist name and your whatever, the date that this was made and stuff like that, the musicians who are in it. So, sorry, I'm just going to drink some water. Yeah, so that takes us on to essential shortcuts and mouse modifiers. And this is kind of a thing that I really like. One of the things that really annoyed me about FL Studio was the fact that the workflow was really nice, apart from a couple of things, and I couldn't find a way to easily change, you know, sort of little behaviors like, you know, nudging MIDI notes and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so Reaper allows you to basically customize everything. And I've gone to the liberty of creating a bunch of GIFs painstakingly to sort of illustrate all of these really cool like shortcuts and stuff like that to just make your workflow a little bit better. I've also added the actual actions that you can assign, and then these are just the shortcuts that I use. But yeah, like I don't necessarily say you should use these ones, but just, you know, they're just an idea of what you can use. So anyway, so you can add and delete items, obviously. But what's nice is for media items, if you have one selected, you can draw in the same media item across the timeline, which is really handy. Say, for example, you're doing like kicks or you're doing hi-hats or whatever, like particularly for drums, this is really cool if you're just using samples. If you don't have one selected, then, or as in like a media item, it will draw in a MIDI item, and that's really handy because I actually use them for like using, like when I'm doing sound design, I'm using them for like creating like just blank audio like MIDI items, blank media items just in the timeline for defining regions and stuff like that. But yeah, this stuff's really cool. Also, I delete the you can delete the items very easily as well with just this action here. And now that you know the format of how these slides are, I'm gonna go through the rest of them quite quickly. So adjusting volume with the mouse scroll wheel, that's really cool. I use this all the time, but for music, it's equally as good. And also you can select multiple items at the same time and drag them up and down. There's also another shortcut where you can reset these item like volumes and stuff like that I haven't put here for some reason. But yeah, it's easy enough to search through the action list within Reaper. So also same kind of deal as the volume. This is the pitch shift, and I use this with clicking just so that I don't like have to wonder which one I'm doing. And pitch shifting is really, really handy, just, you know, being able to do it with your mouse rather than having to like input stuff manually. I created this script that you can access here for doing the time stretch or increasing and decreasing the rate. There are a bunch of options of whether, you know, like it changes the length or if it keeps the length and just changes the rate and stuff like that. So yeah, that's really cool, really handy for just changing the rate. And you can do this on multiple items as well, like multiple selected items. Stretch markers are something that I discovered when I was looking for the Logic equivalent of what are they called? They're like fades, like time fades, whatever they're called. Lewis can tell me this. But whatever, you can sort of like do tape stops with fades in Logic. But the power of the stretch markers is you can do that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be at the start or the end of a media item. You can literally put in these stretch markers and then you know, like affect either side or both sides, or sort of like shift them left and right. And they're really good for, on the one hand, doing tape stops or automating. I put pitch here, but actually it's the rate over time. Or you can use it for realigning the timing of, say, for example, like you've got a drum pattern that is out of time, and you can sort of like stretch them so that they sort of like fit again. And you have to get the preserve pitch when changing rate option in the media item settings. You have to make sure that that's like ticked when you're using that on things like drums so that it doesn't sound a bit funky. But yeah, check that out. It's really, really cool. These are the actions that I use for creating them, but I think these are the default like shortcuts for them. Something else that is absolutely fantastic that I was really lacking from Logic was the idea of pooled items. I think they're called like clones or something like that in Logic, but these pooled items, essentially, if you normally copy an item over, they have no linkage to one another, and that's it. But this creates a link of these items where when you affect one of them, it will affect the other item. What's kind of cool about that is the fact that like there is no master item. If you remove one of them from the pool, all the rest of them are still kind of like sorry, I was reading comments and stuff and got sidetracked. But essentially, if you take one of them off, like you'll see here, I click this little button here to unlink them. They become unlinked. But if there's a third one, it doesn't matter which one that you unlink. The other two will still remain linked, and that's really cool. Another thing that's really cool is the automation items, which means that you can draw automation in an automation lane, and you can move them around and manipulate them as though they were items as well. But what's also cool is the fact that you can copy them, but you can also create pooled items with them as well. So you can create pooled items and then affect all of them with all the fades and all of the curves and stuff, and that will it will propagate those changes across all the pooled items as well. So if anyone knows the pain of working with automation lanes and moving one item and then a bunch of other points sort of come in, then that's really annoying. But also there can be like a base volume, or let's say this is like a volume automation lane, there can be a base volume here, and you don't then have to sort of like click a little bit before it to put in a point so that you can change the point afterwards. I don't know, it's a faff. This changes everything, and it makes it like a lot nicer and simpler to use, just because everything is kind of items. So that's that's all of the things. This is kind of a sarcastic joke about the elephant in the room being MIDI editing and stuff like that, but I just feel really bad for the elephant looking at this. So, right, here we go. I'm going to cop out and tell you to just look at these guys. Basically, when I started looking at MIDI editing, it was like really like I'd had enough of FL Studio. I'd kind of tried with Ableton, but it wasn't really working for me. And I just searched the internet for how other people do it, because allegedly people did, use the MIDI stuff in in Reaper, like the MIDI editing tools, but I didn't really understand how. So check out these guides. They sort of cover a bunch of stuff and sort of like pick and choose what you want from it. But I'm still going to like highlight all of the stuff that that's good about it and some extra things as well. This is a little workflow demonstration that was on one of them. And essentially what it's showing is that you can set it up so that you can edit multiple MIDI items simultaneously. The annoying thing about Reaper is that it tries to get you to do one MIDI item at the time, and you can only have one MIDI item visible in the MIDI editor. However, you can actually change that setting, so you can like adjust all of these, at the same time. Edit it all in one single window. You can swap between the active item. So they're just clicking this little action that they like set up on their timeline, but essentially you can not their timeline, their toolbar. And what it means is you can sort of like swap between whichever one is the active one, so that when you're editing things, you don't accidentally move any of the MIDI notes. I actually have it set up so that you can edit all of them at the same time. So yeah, it works a little bit more like Logic, and as you see here now, you can edit all of them at the same time. It also means that you can edit velocities and automation for multiple selected items at the same time as well, which is incredibly handy. But some other things that I think are worth highlighting is all of the other functionality of the MIDI editor. So that includes drawing in MIDI notes and deleting them, which is incredibly easy. But obviously you have to sort of set these things up. These are the actions for doing that. And it's really cool because you can also put modifiers in as well for, as you can see here, drawing things in without like ignoring the grid lines and the snapping and stuff, and moving things up and down. deleting things, there's an eraser tool that I'm using here for deleting all of these items and stuff as well. You can basically do whatever you want with it. You can just find the actions for, erasing these things or adding things in, or you can do it so that you can put in like you drag across the screen and it'll put like a MIDI note in every grid space. So yeah, lots of really handy tools. Something else that I haven't really shown here as well is the fact that I've got all of these things assigned to my keyboard as well, so that I can like move notes up and down, or like move things up and down an octave and stuff like that as well. Something else that's really cool that I use a lot for a bit of humanization is this arpeggiate, ignoring snap. So that allows you to do things like strums, or just add in a little bit more like humanization for things like, I don't know, guitars and harps and like glissando stuff. Quantizing, which is a very essential part of MIDI editing. There is a quantization dialogue thing here, I guess, which is really cool. I think by default there is the quantization thing up on the toolbar, but you can always just edit the toolbar yourself and add that in. And essentially it affects all of the selected notes, or you can change what the quantization rules are up here. It gives you basically everything you need. You can affect the strength. You can set it to be like the grid, or you can set it to be other things as well. Like you could say, like, you could do the J Dilla thing, which is like setting different swing strengths per like instrument or something. So you could put like a, I don't know, 30% swing on the hi-hats, and put like a 50% swing on the kick, and a 70% swing on the snare and stuff like that. That's really cool. But an extension of this, you could also do things like you can linearly interpolate between the quantization and not quantized values as well. So you could sort of like ramp up to being like more quantized as you go. Basically, I think this highlights that there are like a lot of options here for quantization that I haven't necessarily seen in any other DAW as far as I've used. So that's really cool. Humanization is another really, really important aspect of MIDI editing, especially when you're working with like orchestral samples and stuff like that, or I don't know, if you're making drum grooves and things. So you've got all of these options here, but also I love the fact that you can change the random seed. So if you've got the like right settings and then you click new seeds, then you can just sort of like find some other like variations. So you can have these like quantization settings on like a hi-hat or something. Sorry, not quantization, humanizing. And then you could, like in the next bar, you could do some like just change the random seed, and then it will give you like a little bit more variation and stuff like that. So really, really interesting. Transposing as well. I don't need to go into it too much. Sorry, just reading the chat a little bit. So transposing is really useful for just for composition in general. I don't need to go into this too much, because basically it does everything that transposing does. You can snap it to a scale, you can change the number of octaves, you can affect the selected notes or every note in the MIDI item. So lots of really useful tools here. I think this may be the last one of the tools is being able to set the note lengths is really, really like vital. I'll start with the fact that I've set up like actions to set the note duration on all of the selected track MIDI items, or MIDI notes rather. And I use that all the time. It's really nice to just be able to like quickly snap to whatever subdivision you want. And also there's a really cool legato tool for setting the note length to up until the like start of the next note, and that's really handy for like any like VST instrument that requires the notes to be overlapping for it to be legato. So that's really cool. Something else, MIDI drum editing is another really powerful thing. There's a link here to the Reaper Tips guide to doing MIDI drum editing and stuff as well. But essentially, you can set notes to being diamonds, because for the most part, drums don't need to be like, they don't need to have durations for the MIDI notes. They just need like a trigger, and the diamonds just helps like clean up the visuals of what that looks like. You can toggle on and off these like names beside it and stuff, but you can also add names to the piano roll as well. Some instruments become like some instruments come with this by default, but other instruments you would kind of have to set them up yourself, and you could maybe make presets and stuff like that for like those instruments that you're creating. So again, the world is your oyster, and you can do whatever you want with this, and as much or as little as you want. It's really interesting. And something else, something else, as if I need to like go on more, and if you guys aren't like already convinced, there's this other really cool thing which I've never used before, but I think it looks really cool, is that you can use the inline MIDI editor in Reaper, which essentially allows you to edit MIDI in the arrange window or the timeline without actually having to open up the MIDI editor at all. The difference is obviously this piano roll is a lot smaller, and you don't have like all the toolbar on top. So yeah, it's a little bit more limited, but if you're just moving notes around, doing also like just basic MIDI editing, then this is pretty cool as well. Something else to do with MIDI that I found I was lacking a bit. Reaper does have like an arpeggiator and stuff like that, but it's not really quite the same as say Logic's. So there is this script by Aeolian1 called Chord Scales Ops. And essentially this is like a dialogue sort of thing. So like you right click on notes, or you right click on the MIDI editor, and then you can create the like chords and arpeggios and you know, all sorts of stuff here, and it sort of just immediately pops it into the MIDI editor as well. So you know, if you want to just cut out the brain thinking of like how you want to do this stuff, it's really cool for workflow if you're just like, you know, putting in like arpeggios and stuff. There's also this thing called Captain Chords, which is a paid plugin, but if people feel they need the extra sort of like context of what these chords are in relation to each other, then this is another thing as well. I don't use this, but I know that there might be producers who might actually want something like that, but I thought I'd just put it in anyway. Right, plugin effects. We know what Logic looks like, probably, or FL Studio or Ableton, and this is what they look like. There is a legacy of plugin effects, and yeah, they look very pretty. I'm just going to let this soak in. Now for Reaper. Yeah, there's a reason that people don't like Reaper plugins. They are pretty ugly. For me personally, they don't look nearly as good as any other stock plugins. However, don't be deceived, because they are still very powerful. Like I know a bunch of people who still use the like re-EQ stuff, and I mean, even I use the compressor at times when I don't want to have like too many like visuals distracting me from what things sound like and stuff. So yeah, they're still useful, but I understand that this isn't very user friendly, and particularly like inspiring when you're trying to like be creative, and especially in 2024 when plugins look really good, like this just feels bad. At least let us turn it to dark mode is what I'm saying. But as for alternatives, I'm gonna point to Presley Hines' free audio resources doc, which is specifically targeting like sound designers, but it is also just very like useful for musicians as well, because there are a bunch of like free plugins and free like sound effects and all sorts of stuff that you could like put in your music as well. So check that out. Shout out to Presley for putting that together. Other free alternatives, some that may be included there already, include Kilohertz. I'm not affiliated with Kilohertz, but I'm going to gush about them for a little bit because I think that what they're doing is really cool, and their plugins look really good compared to, let's say, the Reaper plugins. And they're also free. And they do exactly what you want, and you could probably make a hit record with just, you know, just the Kilohertz plugins, I reckon. But if Kilohertz doesn't float your boat, then Melda also has a bunch of free effects as well, and I highly recommend checking them out as well, and just sort of like take your pick. I use their saturator a fair bit, and that is yeah, really useful stuff, and it's free. Again, it's 2024. I'm not saying that we shouldn't pay for things, but also at the same time, like, yeah, there are free things that are really good. So maybe don't break the bank just to get pretty plugins. But in terms of paid alternatives, I am a big fan of FabFilter, Isotope, and Soundtoys, and my God, dare I say it, Waves. I feel like the industry is moving away from Waves, but they do have some good things like tape emulators and RBase and stuff like that. So yeah, these are some alternatives that I recommend. But I'm not really here to tell you about paid plugins, because, you know, you'd probably be paying for them regardless of which DAW you're using. So, Lewis, we get to Space Designer. No, you can't get Space Designer in Reaper, and I'm sure there might be some mad person out there who can convert the Logic version of like VSTs to Reaper, and that would be great. But for the meantime, there is a convolution reverb that's free called Convology XT, which is really good. I used it for a bit. I actually use the Kilohertz Convolver plugin probably more than I use, say, something like even Altiverb and that, which I have through work. But I just find that it's like the UX is so simple and minimal, and yeah, it's nice. But I have it on good authority, Lewis, that Fog Convolver is, according to the internet, better than Space Designer. Don't take my word for it. Take the internet's word for it. But I think everything you can do in Space Designer, you can do in Fog Convolver. So if you're itching to spend some money, then yeah, you can try this out and let me know how it compares. In terms of plugin instruments, that's another weakness of Reaper, because it doesn't necessarily really come with anything apart from what I remember, a soft synth. But a quick Google search, which is going to be probably something that I say quite a lot, is that you'll find that there are a bunch of free instruments that you can find for Reaper. And some of them include, the highlights are Labs by Spitfire Audio. Decent Sampler has a bunch of really cool stuff, and it's sort of combating the monopoly that Contact has. However, Complete Start is also a thing. And that's pretty good for people starting out. Vital Synth is fantastic, and people have been using this more and more, including like highly esteemed producers and stuff like that. And if you don't have the money to dish out for Serum, or alternatively, you just like prefer it over Serum, it's really cool. There's also, for orchestral stuff, for people starting out, BBC Symphony Orchestra Discover is really, really good. And there's also the free orchestra by Project Sam that's also really cool as well. As for some other synthy stuff, I do a bit of chiptune things every now and again. And yeah, the Magical 8-Bit plug by YMCK gives you an 8-bit retro, oh my God, I can't speak, an 8-bit retro synth for making all of your chiptuney sounds. There's also the Sora Boy VST by Shadow Sora, very edgy name. Which is a Game Boy emulator synth, and that's really fun to use as well. It's quite minimal and quite simple, but it's relatively authentic. And then also check out Full Bucket Music, who they've got some cool free plugins as well, but also they've got a bunch of like synths that are free that I think are just like emulators of like Junos and other like what do you call them, like vintage synths and stuff like that, like lots of outboard gear that they've emulated. So check that stuff out. And I'm also going to talk about Faceplant a bit, because I haven't gushed enough about Kilohertz. I swear I'm not affiliated with them, but I would love to be. If you're watching Kilohertz, I love you. And yeah, so anyway, I was looking for a sampler, which I felt I was missing after Logic. The sampler was one of the things that I used the most on when I was working on Warp Drive. And it really annoyed me that, again, the visuals of Resamplematic just weren't like as user-friendly as I was kind of hoping that they would be. Yeah, then I found, well, I started using Faceplant for work, and I found that actually it makes a really good sampler, but also I bought it for the granular engine, which is also really cool for music. And then also you've got all of the other generators and stuff, so you can just basically do whatever you want in it. Some people are making some really cool things, like Joel Blanco Berg is making a bunch of orchestral like instruments and stuff like that. I used the Woodwinds things to make some music, which is also really cool. So his like Woodwinds library is really awesome, and I honestly think that this is the future of like virtual instruments and stuff. But I guess we'll see. So arrangement. I will never miss an opportunity to make a niche Lego City meme reference. But with regards to, my God, sorry, just I'm going to say that the people in the chat who are like putting all of the links in for everything that I'm saying, I've already linked most of these things, but thank you very much for doing all the work for me. I really appreciate you guys, you folks. So this is the Media Explorer. I felt like I was lacking the Apple loops when I moved away from Apple. And I know that Ableton and FL Studio and a bunch of other like DAWs have similar sort of things. But essentially, what makes this good is that it's kind of more like a database that you can structure however you like. The downfall of it is the fact that it doesn't come with a bunch of loops and a bunch of sounds and sound effects and whatever, like with the software. But the power of it is that it's essentially kind of like a light version of, say, Soundly, or like even more light version of SoundMiner. But it allows you to sort of like create and search through these custom databases, as well as adjust the pitch, rate, volume, and length of clips. You can sort of like do what you do in Soundly and sort of like grab these, like little sections and stuff like that and drag them in, or change the pitch or change the volume and all that sort of stuff. But it also detects tempo, and you can change the rate accordingly. There's also this sort of like double time and half time buttons up here to sort of like speed things up. So it is really powerful, actually. And there's a video here that I learned a hell of a lot about this, that I wasn't using it before, and then this forced me to use it because of how powerful it is. So I highly recommend you checking out this link when you get the slides, and you can click through this link. In terms of loop libraries, yes, it doesn't come with anything, but a quick Google search. With a quick Google search, I found this link to Music Radar, which has 92,698 free music samples, loops, hits, and multis. Also, 99 Sounds has free sound packs and sample libraries online. But again, it's 2024, and a little anecdote that I have is that I was looking for a Kuika sample, and I think, maybe something that was like playable. If you don't know what a kuika is, it's a Brazilian instrument, but you sort of like, it's a bit phallic, but it makes like a sort of sound, and it's, weird. But a quick Google search, and I found this free library online from VST Buzz, or a Brazilian series. And I found it in no time at all. So I guess just Google things. But if you can't Google things, or you're not finding what you are looking for, then I think that something I just kind of want to advocate for is like make your own samples. Like go around the house or go anywhere and take a recorder. You don't even need a good recorder. Like, take your phone and record things, and just sort of like find inspiration in the world. And these are the sort of things that I noticed that help producers stand out. Like, it's wild. Even I ended up buying a shaker or like a percussion set. And honestly, I've used rice in a jar more than I've used my shakers that I bought, just because I prefer the texture. And I don't know, there's something about it. And I think that these things add character. So I guess go out there and see, if you can't find like, this one specific thing in the world of like things like splice and whatever, which is making the industry sound a little bit more generic. Try and find things that are unique to you and your surroundings to help your music stand out, and help you express yourself through your own eyes and the world. Anyway, that's my spiel. There's this other really cool thing. When I was looking for a tool for sort of like slicing up drum beats, when I was doing a bit of drum and bass earlier this year, I found the MK Slicer gives you two bits of functionality. You can either quickly slice, quantize, manipulate, or sample media items and like from loops and stuff like that. Or what you can do is you can convert the slices into a playable instrument using Resamplematic and with only one button press. And it converts it into a playable instrument that you can sort of like, you see all these MIDI notes or each sort of slice, and then you can play it just like, producers have done for decades, making like drum and bass or, that style of like sampled music. So check MK Slicer out. Highly recommend it. I actually use it all the time for both music and sound design. So yeah, it's really handy. Another thing that's really cool, I talked about arpeggiators in terms of MIDI and stuff, but arpeggiators in terms of this is still MIDI, but it's more the sort of like automated like arpeggiation. So there's this plugin called Blue Arp that is really good. You can sort of like put in like step arpeggios and all that sort of stuff. or RandArp, which is something that's a little bit more like an automated rule-based arpeggiator. So it's more like what you'd find on like a hardware synth or something like that. And then there's another one that's called marpeggiator, which is a script, which is a little bit more involved, but it's still really cool. I personally use RandArp the most because I would use it for like synth and just press and hold a button and then it does the thing. I would then use BlueArp, and then marpeggiator was a bit complex for my liking, but it may suit someone else's needs. Pardon me, I've been talking for a while. But that takes us on to themes. This is the default Reaper theme. And I think we can all agree that it's okay. It's got better in recent years, but it's still not the prettiest like looking DAW out there. But the benefits of Reaper is the fact that there are loads of user-made custom themes. They're accessible from this forum post here, which you can click when you get the slides. And even within these custom themes, there is still a bunch of customization for like accessibility options, which isn't something that I've necessarily seen all that much like in other DAWs. I think they try to like blend in accessibility, but I don't really see all that much in there. So it's kind of nice that you can change you can change the saturation, you can change the custom colors and stuff. You can change the I don't know, the contrast. So yeah, lots of customization, and that's really cool. This is the Reaper Tips theme, the one that I use for music. And I find that it's just like kind of like pleasant on the eyes. It evokes this idea of making music, or what I'm used to for making music. And that's kind of cool. But there's also Smooth 6, which was sort of the gateway drug for me into using Reaper in the first place, because I really hated the old Reaper 6 theme. And I know a lot of people who use this as well. And again, it's nice, it's simple, it's kind of got everything you need exposed, and that's really cool. And then this other one that I think might suit other people's needs. It's not really for me, but it looks kind of like Universal Audio sort of like bit of kit. Very highly saturated and like nice dark theme and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know, take your pick, or don't use any of these and find your own. There is also the way that a lot of people use transition to Reaper by using themes of the software that they're used to. So I know a bunch of people, including a bunch of sound designers, who use like iLogic for, because they used to use Logic but still want the functionality of Reaper. It's kind of good. Like it looks relatively authentic, but of course it's never going to be what it's trying to imitate. But if this is the UX that you're used to, then it's kind of handy for being able to have the same sort of visual language. Same with the Pro Tools ones. I haven't used Pro Tools all that much, but it looks convincing enough to me. FL Studio one, this R Live one, the Ableton Live one looks a little bit less convincing, but I'm sure that there are a bunch of others. I think I just picked from like 3 random ones. And then another little fun bit of functionality that I found is that for my brain, I struggle to be creative in Concerto, in the theme that I use for my day-to-day sound design work. So I moved over to the Reaper Tips theme, and I find that helps me get myself into a music making like mindset. And you can actually just change it with the you can change it with the shortcut. This is the shortcut. It's called load theme slot. You can set which slot each of these themes are, and you can do that like without reloading the software and stuff like that, which is really cool. But I think maybe I'd like add another theme for maybe mixing or something like that, something with like a clearer mixer or whatever. But you kind of just suit your needs, find what works for your brain, really. And if you need that sort of cognitive like separation of of what the visuals represent, and kind of like if they help with your like creative process, then find something that works for you, and you can swap between all of them. I find it really handy. I highly recommend it. Oh yeah, and also these are the little icons that I've put. There's a little Space Invader for my video game stuff, video game sound design stuff, and then a little guitar here for my music stuff. I mentioned MFX List earlier. This is a really cool, I guess it's a script or plugin or whatever it is. It's a bit of a faff to download, but I've put the link to the forum post here. And essentially what it is that on a lot of themes, you don't really have the your inserts, your like effects inserts visible. So what it does is it exposes the like inserts next to it, next to all of the tracks. And what you can do is you can view all of your effects. So you can easily add new effects by just clicking on here, and it opens up a little dialog box for which effect you want to add. You can enable, disable, copy, and remove effects with mouse like shortcuts and sort of drag things. And you can also like add things very easily there. And also, one of the nice things, I'm not entirely sure how you can do it without MFX List, but essentially when you click on one of these, it opens up the plugins as a like a separate window. Whereas if you open up the effects, I don't even know where it is here on this theme, but if you open up, yeah, there, the effects, then it will pop up a dialog with all of the effects on the side, and you can only open up one at a time, which is a bit of a pain in the ass. So I found that that was really helpful for my workflow, for being able to here, say, open up re-Q and re-comp in 2 separate windows. So that's really cool. Right, I'm going to take a breath. So that takes us to mixing and signal routing, another one of the big points that was pointed out at the start of this talk. I kind of get what people are saying about it not being like FL Studio, for example, but there are a lot of, each software is kind of different. But one of the biggest pros to Reaper for me is the fact that you can have unlimited nested tracks, as far as I know. Maybe there's like a hardware limit, but like you can nest track under track under track under track, and essentially you inherit the parent volume and the panning and all that sort of stuff. So say, for example, you've got like I don't know, like a character bus. If you're doing, I'm sorry, I'm in sound design mode. Let's say, for example, you're doing like a percussion bus or something like that, or you want to like, I don't know, like automate the volumes or automate the panning, or I don't know, put an effect on all of these things. You don't have to create an auxiliary bus to do that and send all of your tracks through that. You can just put it straight on the parent object, and that's really nice, or the parent track rather. All the signal flows through the parent track, unless you send things to like to other tracks. And this is all visually represented in the mixer, where you have your sends here, and you've got like little indents here for the nested tracks and stuff like that. And even no matter how far you nest, it will still sort of like make them go like smaller and smaller. I'm seeing GIFs of like the yeah, just weird Inception shit. Yeah, you could totally just keep going as far as you want. To open your track routing to see your sends and receives, this is on the Reaper Tips theme, but on other themes it will look slightly different. But essentially, it will look something like this next to the effects, and this opens up this dialog, which is a bit intimidating at first. But essentially, what it is you've got your sends here, and you've got your receives here. And you can change all of these things per send, so it ends up becoming like a list. You can change which audio channels to send, whether it's like the origin or the destination. You can send different MIDI channels and stuff like that. It's basically everything you would really need from a send. And you can change the send amount here, or the panning of what you're sending and stuff like that. So it's really cool. And this is all just like to do with track stuff and like the volume and all that sort of stuff. You can sort of check that out yourself. But something that's really cool, which is a nice workflow thing, is that you can literally click on one of these send and receive buttons and drag it onto another send and receive button. And yeah, it will just automatically hook up a send from here to here. It's got this little dialog, and you can set up the channels and the MIDI channels as well, and the send amount. And then that's everything. That's everything you would need to do. Of course, you haven't got little wires displaying here like you do in FL Studio, potentially. But I think that this kind of does the trick for sending and receiving signals. But if you do want a more visual representation, I found this thing called the track wire. Oh my God, I sound like Daffy Duck. The track wiring window, or the track wiring diagram. And essentially, this is your whole signal flow of the entire track. And so you see here, you've got your master, you've got your effects plugins here, and you've got the fader and hardware output and all that sort of stuff. So it essentially shows you the whole signal like flow here. And then you've got your percussion, your percussion track with its nested tracks underneath that. and you can see even here this percussion track is sending its audio to the auxiliary track, which I would assume would be like a reverb or something like that. And it shows you here with a diagram. Of course, it's not like an animated wire like you have in certain softwares, but I think it does the job. So I'm going to say that, that I don't think that Reaper is weak at signal routing. I think it's just some of the functionality is kind of hidden and it's not very obvious where it is. But this seems amazing to me. I think if you're kind of confused as to what's being sent where, this is, like as powerful a tool as you need it to be. So with that in mind, I know I've talked a little bit about sound design. Just to talk a bit about sound design for the people who, for probably the majority of people who are here, who are very likely sound designers or who have a passion for, just making sounds in general. I just want to go through like a couple of little things to sort of like talk about how sound design is kind of music. Like music and sound design are sort of the same thing. I think it was Nathan Moody who said relatively recently that like he doesn't see any difference between making sound design and making music. It's all just as Lewis would say, it's all just wiggly air. So I think that like Global Sampler was one of the biggest tools for me for sort of changing up my workflow, which is really nice because I just put it on my master track and then I put like you can just like drag and drop everything because it's a buffer that's constantly recording and it's got a pretty generous duration, like a generously long buffer, and then you can sort of like drag things in, and I use it to just sort of like say pull out samples from random like either synths or little bits of music and stuff like that without having to sort of like send your signal to another track and then arm it for being recorded and then record it live and stuff like that. Like you can just play stuff and then sort of drag it in, create musical ideas and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. But I guess I also encourage people to try incorporating more sound design into your music. I said go and record your own samples and stuff like that, but like what lessons from sound design have you learned that could be transferable to your music? And this is also why I say that Reaper is really great for that, because you're developing tools for your sound design in, let's say, your day job. But there are probably tools that could also be transferred into your music creation as well. So make use of the skills that you already have. There are also no rules, like as Nathan is trying to get at as well, is that there is no difference between music and sound. These ideas are just sort of things that have come up that we've created boxes and boundaries for stuff. But if you eliminate those boundaries, it's impressive what you can sort of come up with. So I also say check out some artists who use a lot of sound design in their work, like Tennyson or Cone Sound as well, or Todd Baker, who does a lot of video game soundtracks as well. So check out their work and see how you could sort of, I don't know, like add bird chirps and use bird chirps for I don't know, percussion there or something like that. Like it would be very interesting to see what is possible rather than just sticking to what other people tell you music is. So to summarize everything that I've talked about, I think that I should just make it clear that everything that I've talked about isn't gospel. I'm trying to inspire people to move to Reaper. So if you use it for sound design already, it could be useful for you to sort of like create this feedback loop between your sound design and music making to make more interesting sound design or music. It's also highly customizable. So if that's your jam, then Reaper is very likely for you. There is constant support from the developer as well, which is fantastic because as far as I know, it is mostly just one person. There's also an incredibly creative and passionate community of people who are just like constantly making stuff and new tools all the time. And I think that this is really important. And the more people who add to that community and who sort of like participate in it, the more cool things that we'll all get. I'm also a big advocate for the fact that it is very affordable and there isn't such a big, sort of like cost barrier to entry. It's also not platform dependent. So if I give my mum my new computer, then I don't have to worry about moving to a Linux, or I actually don't know if it works on Linux. But if I go back to Mac, I know that I've still got all my keyboard shortcuts and all that sort of stuff, and I don't have to be worried about having to change software ever again, hopefully. And lastly, one of the biggest things I would say for advocating for Reaper is the fact that it's got an excellent rendering pipeline. So yeah. So I would say that if you're working on bigger projects, it's fantastic for being able to like bulk render out things like stems and all that sort of stuff, and all of the other reasons that I mentioned before. Reasons to not make music in Reaper, or I should say reasons to not transfer to Reaper. I would say if you're already happy with what you have, then there's no reason to change. There's no reason to move away from Ableton because you love Ableton, but Jon said that you should move. You shouldn't expect Reaper to do things it's not the best at. And I would say that obviously a lot of people would say, MIDI is not what it's best at. But I think I've proven that that's not the case. But also you shouldn't use it to emulate something badly. Again, if you're using FL Studio or you're using Logic Pro, then don't try to make it Logic Pro. Try to make it like embrace it for what it is. Embrace the chaos of Reaper, because it's you'll be surprised at like what it is actually able to do. And on top of that, don't expect to set it up once and never again, because your workflow is probably constantly going to change. You're constantly going to want to like change keyboard shortcuts because they don't match exactly what you want, or you found a better way of doing something in less time or in a more creative way. So it's constantly going to be evolving. If that's not for you, then that's fine. But don't move to Reaper because everyone else is and because I'm telling you to. Obviously, like evaluate it, make an informed decision, and test to see if it's like right for you. But I would also say maybe if you do decide to evaluate it, give it the benefit of the doubt that it's going to take a little bit of time. But I've given you all of the resources that you need to set up MIDI editing and use the perfect setup guide for setting up all of your basic settings. So, oh my God, it's been exactly half an hour, exactly an hour. So I guess, Greg, would you mind showing me some questions? Did you use the doc, or am I going to have to go through? I'm probably going to have to go through unless he sent them to me on Discord. Let me just double check. Okay, all right. Well, if people can ask, oh yeah, all right, cool, awesome. Thank you so much, Greg. For all a little off topic, but any clue to get a dark background and all the plugins and other dialogues in Reaper in Windows? So I don't know how to do it in Windows. I know you can set all of the plugins, the default Reaper plugins to black on Mac, but I'm still looking for that one. If I find out how to do it, I will put it in on AirWiggles, and I'll share it with the rest of the community. I know that there are a couple of ways to do it, but I'm going to probably reach out to Alejandro from Reaper Tips and see if he can like change it in his Reaper Tips theme. So I guess we'll see. Lewis says, sorry, Jon, we were too busy having an amazing time. We didn't ask any questions. Cool. All right. I guess if anyone wants to ask some more questions, I'll be in the Hangout. Yeah, like feel free to shoot me over some questions. Oh, there is one other thing actually. Jacob Westberg, who he's a composer. He's in the chat here, and he's actually got something really cool working in the works at the moment for creating adaptive music in Reaper. I highly recommend you check out his website, and I will post it in the chat here if he hasn't already. But essentially, I think it's called the Adaptive Music app, and it's a way of creating like adaptive music in Reaper. And yeah, highly recommend you just sort of like sign up to the waiting list and stuff like that. And that's really, really cool stuff. Another example of someone in the community like creating a cool tool that people will find useful. So I highly recommend that. But yeah, if nobody has any other questions, then I guess I'll see you in the Hangout. And if anyone has questions outside of AirCon, because it's all a lot to digest, then also feel free to just like send me a message, and I'll get to it when I can. But yeah, I'm super happy to help other people transition and sort of like ask any, answer any questions that anyone might have. So yeah, so hopefully I've inspired you to move to Reaper. If I haven't, then I hope you enjoy using whatever you're using and you just make cool music in it. And yeah, I guess I'll see you in the rest of AirCon.